Well, I tell you, I admire the Smiths and the Zagaras because I wouldn't have been here if I were them. But we're glad you're back. And we will be looking forward to hearing about your trip. Okay, I'm going to have to move this. I'm sorry. Remind me to put it back in case it's needed. There you go. Now I can talk right to you. Louise laid in bed. She had the blanket up around her head. And she was watching, almost paralyzed, at this strange young man who had come into her house with a load of wood and was filling her wood stove in the kitchen. Well, really, it was a one-room house. So the kitchen was right there with the bed and everything else. Louise watched him. He filled the stove. He got the tea kettle and he filled it with water. And he put it on the stove. And then he went out the door again. Louise thought about it. You know, Louise lived in Alaska. And this was December in Alaska. And I see a few people shivering just thinking about it. And she was a grandma type person. Is that a way of putting, she's a mature person? Well, we want to put the right words. Since I don't have children, I don't have to worry about it. Okay. Anyway, and she was a widow. She lived all alone. And she was outside of Anchorage a ways in the woods. And the neighbors used to come, and they would bring in her wood, make sure she had wood, and make sure she had whatever she needed. But a big snowstorm had settled in. And those of you who have lived where it snows, I mean really snows, like we've been hearing about in New York right now and New England. I'm sure our New England people are all thinking about that. And 5 feet of snow at one time. Listen, 4 inches used to shut down Indianapolis. I don't know what 5 feet would do, but anyway, the big storm had come. And the temperature, after the storm in these places, the temperature goes down. You can count on it. It even does it here. With our little storms that come through, it gets colder. Then it warms back up again. But it got colder. And I mean colder. It was 30 below zero. And Louise had run out of wood. But the next problem was that Louise had a debilitating illness she was getting over. And so she couldn't go out and help herself very much. She couldn't go outside. And she laid there in bed and she took her blanket, she wrapped it around her. Her nose got cold, her ears got cold, her chin got cold. And she prayed, Lord, send somebody. Oh, by the way, this was before cell phones. And she didn't have a telephone. And she says, Lord, send somebody to help me. Bring me wood. Bring me wood. And time went by and nobody came. And nobody came. Finally, she realized that it didn't look like anybody was going to come. And she said, Lord, I trust you. I can freeze to death right here. And I know that. And if that is your will, that's all right. But I put my life and myself in your hands. Pretty soon, the door opened, and here came this strange man. He was tall. He was young. At least he appeared and acted young. He wasn't dressed like the Alaskans dress in December. He had a black coat on, overcoat, and a black hat. And she watched him. He started the fire, and it was beginning to warm up a little bit. He went out, and he came back in again with another load of wood and piled it up. And she thought, do you think this could be an angel? She thought this. And he turned. He hadn't looked at her before. He turned and he smiled and he nodded his head and went out the door. Oh, she couldn't believe it. But gradually she could hear the tea kettle starting to boil, and she began to warm up, get life come back into her. He said, if it was an angel, there won't be any tracks in the snow. And so she staggered out of bed and very carefully walked to the door. We all know that there are always tracks. You walk on fresh snow. Always. She opened the door and there wasn't a track in sight. The whole yard was just like the fresh snow that had fallen on it. And she looked over at where the wood pile was, and it was piled high with snow, like it always was after a snowstorm. And she thought to herself, God loved me enough to send an angel to save my life. God loves you. That's right. He is good.